Ladies and gentlemen, now I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Shri Vivek Ramachandran, Global Head, HSBC Global Trade Solution, United Kingdom. Shri Vivek leads a global team of over 5,000 trade professionals across 50-plus markets. Since joining HSBC in 2015, he has held key roles, including Global Head of Product for GTS and CEO of Serai, a digital B2B network. Shri Vivek also holds a PhD in Economics from Carnegie Mellon University. I request everyone, please join me in welcoming Shri Vivek Ramachandran with a big round of applause.
Now we're going to put technology to the test. But first, let me tell you a story. And I'm hoping I've got some slides. Otherwise, this is going to be a very short presentation. Whilst we're starting, let me start by telling you a story about a period of time that changed our lives, our businesses, and what we do. And it's odd starting a presentation on the future of trade with a picture of a container ship. But that's the story I want to tell you. So take yourself back in time to 1950s. A trucker named Malcolm McLean was waiting at New Jersey port, and he was waiting for his goods to be offloaded off a ship. And what was interesting at that point in time is you had to take the goods, you had to put them into those huge cargo nets, imagine a John Steinbeck novel, and then offload them. And Malcolm couldn't understand why the process was so inefficient. And he thought, would it not be easier for me to just drive my truck onto the ship and then take it off at the other end? And that started his thinking around what the modern container should look like. And over the next 15 years, it evolved into what we call the 20-foot by 40-foot container that has changed what we wear, what we eat, the businesses we live in, and the economies we thrive in. But Malcolm did three things that changed the world. Firstly, he patented the 20-foot by 40-foot container, the stacking container, and he made that container. He made that patent freely available to all of his competition. So he built the IP and he shared it with everyone. Secondly, he moved from trucking into shipping because he realized to change the world, you needed ecosystem participants from multiple sectors to come into play. It's not just trucks, it's not just shippers. You needed ports, you needed customs, you need companies to adopt it. And thirdly, he convinced the US government to use the standardized 20-foot by 40-foot container in the Vietnam War. The reason I share this is the shipping container took 20 years to come into existence, but subsequently, the cost of shipping has gone down by 99%, and it has dictated how the world lives today. Now, as we look forward for the next 5-10 years, I'm not sure we've got a container moment in our future, but we're definitely going to see a world that looks very different. So my name is Vivek Ramachandran. I have the privilege of leading HSBC's Global Trade Solutions business. HSBC is a trade bank. We were founded 160 to facilitate trade between East and West. That's what we do. And it's a real privilege to talk to all of you today. As I tend to do on most mornings, I talked to my parents this morning, and my father was actually 30 years ago when I left India, he was the Secretary of Banking. So what was the precursor to the Department of Financial Services. So he was especially proud that I'm talking to you about the future of trade, but he did take a moment to tell me, had I followed his advice, I'd be on the screen talking to you from the government as opposed to on the stage talking to you. But nonetheless, it's a privilege to talk to you today about what the future of trade looks like. You pick up the newspapers, and the first thing you realize is everyone is predicting the end of trade. Globalization is dead, right? Technology is going to disrupt forces. What I'm going to do over the next 20 minutes or so is two things. I'm going to share with you 5 themes that are shaping the future of trade. I have the privilege of traveling across countries and seeing themes that are common across markets, across client segments. So 5 themes that are shaping the future of trade, and then a few ideas for what it means for us as banking professionals. What does it mean in terms of solutions we need to develop, capabilities we need to build? How do we equip ourselves? And I'm going to make an effort to actually try making this a little interactive. So we've got a couple of questions. I'm actually going to encourage you at some point to take out your phones and participate. But before I start, there's nothing that I'm going to talk about that we're not seeing in some shape or form today. So William Gibson, the science fiction author, pen the line, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. Now, he said this in the context of technology and its access. But I think if you look across the world today, you see snippets of the change that we're going to see, whether it is AI, whether it is geopolitics, whether it's sustainability. India is leapfrogging with the digital stack. But the question is how fast these themes go and where they emerge. But let's actually start with, if you can get your phones out, and this is where we'll test whether technology works. If you could scan the QR code and just enter, how optimistic are you about the future of trade? 1 is extremely pessimistic. You think global trade is going to die as we know it. 4 is extremely optimistic. You think global trade is going to thrive, right? So, extremely optimistic. 5 is extremely optimistic, so it's 1 to 5. So, signal's a bit poor. No signal? I get a few people nodding, so maybe the poll's not going to work. But the one person who's voted is clearly extremely optimistic, so I'll take that as a positive. If the signal's not working, we can skip the poll, because the second question I wanted to go through was, what do you see as the key driver, if you can type in one word, that you see as the key driver that's going to change the future of trade? Okay, I'm going to assume technology has not failed us. It's the wireless connectivity that's failed us. And I'm going to jump straight in. Okay, so 5 themes that are going to shape the future of trade. Number 1, geopolitics. It's difficult to miss the fact that we've got Donald Trump in the White House, and the single theme, one of the most popular themes that got him into the White House was trade and tariffs. Now, economists talk about something called an elephant chart. So if you imagine an XY axis, and I'm actually going to ask you to imagine a few things today because I don't have slides with a lot of numbers. On the x-axis, if you take the entire world's population from the poorest 1% to the richest 1%, and on the y-axis, you look at the change in disposable income over a 20-year period from 1995 to 2005, 2015. What you see is that picture actually looks a bit like an elephant. You've got a big back, and then you've got a trunk that falls and then shoots up at the end. The back of the elephant is sub-Saharan Africa, lower classes in India who have seen development over a 20-year period, albeit starting from an incredibly small base. The tip of the elephant is the richest 0.5% of the world, who have seen phenomenal income growth over this 20-year period. But the trough of the elephant is the middle class in the US, in Europe, in the Western world. That class of people have seen no economic growth in absolute terms. Their nominal income has been flat over 20 years, or in some cases actually gone down. Now, in a world where you've been left behind by development, so that's the white-collar class, or the blue-collar class in the US and in Europe, you need a common enemy. And so in some sense, economists like to believe that explains the rise of the right wing, the rise of Trump, the rise of Brexit. Because you need a common enemy, and one of the enemies is your trading partner who's taking away jobs. But the reality is the world has evolved into a very uneven equilibrium. You have Chinese consumers subsidizing Chinese manufacturing, because China is producing goods that cannot be consumed at home. And you have US manufacturing subsidizing the US consumer, because the US manufacturing industry is incapable or unwilling to produce goods that the consumers want. So that has ended up in a huge trade deficit. And what's really clear is there will be tariffs of some form. It's unlikely to be 60% on China and 20% on Mexico or the US, but if you look out for the next 5 years, tariffs are going to do 3 things. The first, it's likely to drive inflation in the US. And it's going to drive inflation because companies would likely pass the prices on to consumers. Inflation will mean a stronger dollar, because in most scenarios, the Fed will hold the rates higher. That said, Donald Trump did talk yesterday about lowering interest rates, so I don't know how the two square. And the third, in most scenarios, it actually worsens the trade deficit with the US. Because supply chains have evolved over so many decades in such complexity that it's highly unlikely that you can replace what is manufactured all over the world. So in fact, if you look over the last 6, 7 years, China as a percentage of US imports has fallen from 24% to 17%. The latest data we have from the OECD is actually 2022, but if you look over that same period, China as a percentage of US import value add has actually stayed flat at 24%. So what is happening is a lot of low value assembly is being outsourced. And you've got this disconnect between geopolitics causing you to nearshore and bring production closer to home, but equally supply chains are not equipped to doing that. And we're seeing some of that. India has been a beneficiary of this, but if you look at the value added component, India needs to move up that value chain and actually start doing the value add, not just the assembly in electronics and other industries, but that's going to be a big theme that we see. The other theme you see is trade between politically affiliated countries. And our economists at HSBC measure political affiliation by the UN voting record. So China and the US would be at two ends of the spectrum. Trade between politically affiliated countries has gone up, except when it comes to concentrated goods. A lot of what we do require raw materials and require minerals that are concentrated and produced in very small quantities in some markets. So for example, there's a commodity called neodymium. It creates a magnetic chip that is integral to every electric vehicle. It's integral to turbines. 90% of neodymium is refined in China. So it doesn't matter what your political affiliations are. It doesn't matter what your geopolitics are. If you want to manufacture EVs, you need this product. And $1 of neodymium translates to $100 of trade. So if I look out for the next 5 years, 10 years, I think the global landscape of supply chains will change quite dramatically. But real change will happen when countries start moving up the value chain and production, not just outsourcing the assembly. The second theme is an exponential growth in services trade. Bulk of what we see today, so global trade today, 2023 data, is give or take $31 trillion. And 26% of that is no longer container ships and goods. It's services being exported. Now this could be technology services, could be professional services, it could be IP in any shape or form. Now, the servicization of our lives is evident in terms of how you spend. If you look at your household budget, you're probably spending a lot more on services than you did 20 years ago. And services trade has grown twice as fast as goods trade over the last 5 years and 10 years. So if we look out for the next 5 years, 10 years, whether it's the WTO or the OECD or HSBC's internal estimates, we estimate almost 50% of all new trade will be trade in services, not trade in goods. And that's especially true in India. So India's exports at 2023 was almost $775 billion, and 44% of that was in services. I was in Bangalore earlier this week, and what was traditionally outsourcing low-end contact center jobs have now become high-end GCCs, right? The next question that is obvious in everyone's mind is, how does technology disrupt intellectual capital? So if you look at credit analytics or report creation or credit assessment activities that are outsourced, technology will now start disintermediating that. But at least for the next 5, 10 years, we don't see a shift in that. We see the push in trade and services is going to continue exponentially. But that for us has a few challenges, because the way the services sector works in the tech space is your upfront capex is high. You need to manufacture, you need servers, you need chips. But then you monetize that over many years. And I'll talk about this a little bit about what it means for the banking sector, is there is going to be a huge working capital need that services companies need to meet and they need to fulfill. Thirdly, B2B e-commerce. When we think about e-commerce, we think about all of us individually shopping on Flipkart and Amazon. But the reality is B2B e-commerce at $28 trillion in 2024 is more than 5 times the quantum of B2C e-commerce. Historically, trading relationship between companies were built on intimacy. You took years to find a trading partner to get to know each other. And that intimacy was difficult to replace. So finding a new trading partner, a new trusted supplier, building a buyer relationship took decades. B2B e-commerce has allowed you to trade with anonymity. You could trade with an anonymous counterparty, but yet trust them because of the data that they have on these e-commerce platforms. And that means all of a sudden, the world becomes a smaller place. And I would argue it's still a minority of companies that are capitalizing on it. Till the next generation of procurement and sourcing officers come in and realize they don't need to buy things the way they're buying, this picture, our forecast is still for this number to go up a lot over the next few years, but it's an exponential change. And the reason why this is important, again, coming back to the banking theme, is we as a banking sector don't know how to finance B2B e-commerce. Right? We typically like the buyer, we know the seller, we have that relationship, you assess the credit, and it's either performance risk or payment risk, and we know how to evaluate that. This requires us to make credit decisions based on data, on anonymous parties, digital onboarding. It's going to challenge our business models hugely, but that's equally an exciting opportunity for us. Fifthly, SaaS is dead. Satya Nadella said that. He didn't quite mean SaaS is dead. What he meant is agent AI will actually replace SaaS. But what we are seeing is platform-based models way more valuable than SaaS-based models. Historically, you had a taxi company and a passenger. It was a one-to-one relationship. That evolved into, in the UK, minicab companies, which had a fleet of 50 cars. Right? So you have one-to-many. That evolved into Uber, which is many-to-many. Platforms let you push your product through multiple pipes. It's not a one-to-one relationship. And these platform-based models are being evaluated by companies in multiple sectors. So Walmart not just sells their product on Walmart.com, they're now creating a marketplace because they realize you have a large number of suppliers who want to access a large number of buyers. And the valuations speak for themselves in terms of where companies are going. And just in this week, I've spoken to so many companies in India who are building platform-based models. And that's going to be the future. So if we think we struggle with e-commerce and financing suppliers on e-commerce platforms, thinking about the opportunities that trade presents on platform-based models is the next level. And fifth and finally is sustainability. Sustainability, you could argue, the mood music is changing a little bit with the Republicans in power in the US, but the reality is the challenge we've got as a profession, as a community, as a society, it doesn't go away. And you either are going to do sustainability on your terms, or someone is going to ask you to do it. So today it's only 13%. Actually, that's not a small number. 13% of buyers include climate-related requirements in their supply chain contracts. So if you are a supplier to a large US multinational, you better get your credentials on transition plans, whether it's water, whether it's carbon, in order. And you have now countries passing regulations. So Germany has passed something called a Supply Chain Due Diligence Act that requires every company beyond 3,000 employees to attest to the absence of human trafficking anywhere in their supply chain. The average company doesn't know who's in their supply chain. Right? Cost minimization has come at the expense of transparency. Even the largest brands in the world, they know where the garments are manufactured. They might know the fabric mill because they nominate them, but beyond that, the yarn supplier, the cotton ginner, the cotton farm, no visibility. This isn't going to change. It's going to change, and many companies are not going to make the cut, because let's be clear, cost minimization has come at the expense of transparency, and in some cases, it's come at the expense of sustainability practices. So those are the 5 themes. Let's take a look at what this means for us as a banking community. And I'll share a little bit about what it means for us at HSBC and how we're trying to deal with it. Now, we've done trade for 160 years, and we do it at a scale that no other bank does. We double the size of our next global competitor, and we facilitate almost $1 trillion of trade a year. So for us, figuring out these themes for global trade and how we equip ourselves to respond to them is existential. It's not a nice to have, it's a must have. It dictates why we exist as a bank and how we look as a bank. I'm going to skip the polling question, assuming the technology doesn't work, and also conscious that I've got a clock that is ticking down in front of me. I think, yeah. So the first one is working capital. I've anonymized the data, but this is data from India's largest tech companies. The gray bar is the days sales outstanding. It's how long it takes you to get paid on your sales. The red bar is days payables outstanding. It's how long you take to pay your suppliers. And the black bar, which you can see only in company 4, is days inventory. So it's how long the inventory or the stock is staying on your books. Now, ideally, you want the blue line, which is the working capital divided by sales, to be, you want to push it down as much as possible. So you want to get paid as quickly as possible, you want to pay as late as possible, and you want to have as little inventory as possible on your books. This used to be the corporate treasurer's job. It no longer is. So obviously I've anonymized the companies, but this is all public data. There's no HSBC proprietary data, and you can probably take a guess as to which these companies are and the largest tech companies in India. But you'll see a huge difference. And the difference between the best company and the worst translates to billions of dollars of freed up cash, translates to, in this case, 4-5% on return on tangible equity, and if the math works, that should translate to billions of dollars of equity valuation. So this is no longer just the remit of the corporate treasurer. This is actually on the CEO's agenda, it's on the CFO's agenda. And I'm going to venture, how many of you, I guess most people here are bankers, but I'm going to venture that almost 100% of our banks, including HSBC, don't optimize our own working capital. We have just put in place in the last few years a supply chain finance program for our own suppliers. And how ironic is that we sit on liquidity and we advise clients on payables financing and receivables financing, but we don't do it ourselves. So this is not a sales pitch, but take a look at your own working capital. The average banking treasurer thinks about ALM, thinks about funding, does not think about working capital. The average procurement person thinks about getting the right supplier at the cheapest price, doesn't think about the payment terms. And in most cases, the moment you have a trade payable on your books, you're holding cash against it, and you're leaving value on the table. Right? If you'd like to learn more about what we've done, we're happy to share that with you. The second big theme is data. I'm excited by data, I'm excited by AI. When you talk about AI, there are three categories of AI. You have predictive AI. If A, then B. So the ability to extrapolate from data. You have prescriptive AI. If faced with the situation, do this. This is the right action based on the available data. That's prescriptive AI. And then you have generative AI, which is large language models. The bulk of the value of AI in the short term for us as an industry is risk management. We see and we process millions of trade transactions. 5 years ago, we had an army of people, thousands of people reviewing trade documents, looking for dual-use goods, looking for over-invoicing, looking for under-invoicing. We invested in an AI-based system called Global Social Network Analytics, and we realized people checking data and documents is a waste of time because you don't pick up. If someone wants to flood the trade system, you can. But rather, we look at all connected parties in the trade ecosystem and try understanding linkages between them. And we've saved billions of dollars based on financial crime or fraud. So one example we had is we actually had someone who accidentally 6 years ago used the same mobile phone number for one of their suppliers they needed to pay. Impossible for humans to pick that up, but technology can do that. And this is where we're seeing the biggest upside. The two places we're seeing the biggest upside with AI in the short term in corporate and wholesale banking and trade finance is risk management and in coding. Our developers now are 50% more efficient in many cases because you have computer programs or AI-based solutions to develop code. And like us, I'm sure many of you have legacy systems, and that's been a challenge about changing legacy systems because of language and because of coding. AI can actually translate a lot of that. So we are trying to adopt our technology stack based on using AI and large language models. Thirdly, if I was talking to you 5 years ago, I'd be talking to you about blockchain. Blockchain was going to save our world, right? We were going to put everything on a distributed ledger. Transactions are going to be digital. Today, trade is as paper-based as it ever was. Trade is the last analog frontier in banking. I'm going to predict in the next 10 years that's going to change. And I'm confident it's going to change because going back to the example of the shipping container, the single instance that got a unified shipping container was the US government adopting 20-foot by 40-foot container. Right? And countries and companies that got that right changed their future. Dubai and Singapore were built on the basis of predicting what global trade would look like. They didn't exist as countries of any scale till they built their ports. If trade goes digital, the upside is not a few operational people saved in processing efficiency. The upside is the value of the data. And the reason I'm optimistic is because of one point, which is the bottom right. The model law. The UN has a model law for electronic transfer of records. This is a legal framework which is now adopted in a different guise, but in the same version. The UK just adopted the Electronic Trade Documentation Act. Germany, France, US, UAE, India are all thinking about adopting a legal framework. So what do you need to have digital trade? You need 4 things. The first, you and I need to agree, what data do we need? So when you say, I need an invoice, you know, you don't mean a paper called an invoice, you mean 6 data fields. You mean description of good, value of good, date, and so on. When you mean a shipping document or bill of lading, again, you mean the data fields. So the ICC has developed a digital standards index of 64, 68 data fields, which is required to complete a trade. We all use letters of credit. It's not a legal document. It's codified by the ICC. So the ICC DSI lays out what data you need. The second, we need a legal framework to exchange this data. That's what MLETR gives us. The technology in 2025 is easy. We've got systems that can talk to each other. We've got APIs that can talk to each other. And then lastly, we all need to show up at the table. You need ecosystem participants to be at the table. You need banks, you need shippers, you need freight forwarders, you need customs. But if we can digitize trade, it's going to have a real catalyst impact on boosting trade for the future, but also the value of the data that exists in the ecosystem. Let's acknowledge as a banking sector, we benefit when the world is inefficient. When buyers don't know sellers, you need an intermediary. When you got frictions, you got float. So we're not quite incentivized to make the world more efficient when we like it being inefficient. But if we can digitize trade together, I think we'll see a step change in the quantum of trade. And I'm going to predict in the next 10 years, we'll see a push towards digital trade. And finally, we've got a big part to play in sustainability. I talked about how suppliers are now being incentivized to bring in and share data, to improve their practices. We have seen an explosion. I'm just using 4 examples, which are Asda, Levi's, Walmart, and Saint-Gobain. But we've got an explosion of companies who now want to use financing as a hook to incentivize suppliers to share information and to meet higher standards. And that's a theme. So yesterday we spoke to a large automotive manufacturer, and they're thinking about a supply chain finance program, and they actually would like to have some incentives built in with sustainability. So this is going to be another huge opportunity for us to invest in as a sector. So the world of trade is going to look completely different from what it does today. None of us, prediction is a fool's game, but you do have to get prepared for different scenarios. And whether it's geopolitics reshaping supply chains, whether it's services overtaking goods, whether it is the platform economy, e-commerce, or sustainability, we've got a huge imperative to actually act. And the last point is embedded financing. Financing has historically been a journey separate from banking, separate from commerce. Embedding financing into platforms is what the future would look like. At the point of sale, how do I make sure that I get paid now? I can pay now and I can buy now and pay later. Or how do I make sure that I can subsidize a supplier? This is an opportunity of a generation. So trade is the last analog frontier in banking, and I'm going to venture and say in the next 5 years, you will have a $100 billion company with one product, which is embedded financing. I'm hoping that $100 billion company will be created amongst us, but if we don't move quickly enough, it'll happen outside the banking sector. We've seen that in payments. We've seen that in many other spaces. Our challenge and opportunity is how do we build that? I'm conscious I'm out of time, so I'll leave you with a thought of how prepared are you? And I always end with this slide, which is the actual picture of HSBC's first board meeting in 1865, right? And you can't read the script, but the beautiful calligraphy actually talks about the fact that Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank was founded to facilitate trade between East and West. That remains our core purpose. It remains the essence of everything we do, the countries we go into, the clients we serve, the banks we partner with, and the businesses we build. So it's been a privilege to talk to all of you today, and it remains a privilege for me to lead HSBC's trade business. When I grew up in India, my dream would have been travel the world and solve puzzles. I think this job is the perfect definition of that. I get to travel the world, I get to talk to clients about interesting problems they're facing, and our goal is to make sure that we're relevant in helping them solve those puzzles. So thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to talk to all of you.
Request you, sir, to continue gracing the dais and kindly be seated. Now, I would like to request Shri M.V. Rao, Chairman IBA, to present a memento to our esteemed guest as a token of appreciation.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Hopefully you found it interesting.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, may I now request Shri Gopal Mulli Bhagat. Sir, you can continue gracing the dais and kindly be seated.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I now request Shri Gopal Mulli Bhagat, officiating Chief Executive IBA, to propose the vote of thanks for inaugural session. Request you, sir, to join us on the dais.
Thank you, Pooja. Thank you very much. Dear friends, colleagues, seniors, and industry leaders who are present here. First of all, many thanks to all of you for showing keen interest in participating in this event, which we call as IBA Signature Event. 20th edition is really a long journey, and we have evolved. As Mr. Ramachandran was mentioning during his presentation, that he was looking at the time clock. I am also looking at the same. We have very tight schedule today, so I'll not take much time. But I feel this is an opportunity to learn from global leaders on various aspects of banking in the global field itself. We have many geopolitical challenges. Amidst that, there is an opportunity also to grow, to find new horizons, and in that direction, we invited Mr. Vivek to come and give a presentation on global trade finance. I am thankful to you, Shri Vivek ji, for sharing your experience and possibilities in the global trade. We are really obliged. Looking forward for many more such participation in future also. Thank you, friends. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman, sir, for doing these honors and being with us. I will take this opportunity to thank our MC members. All have been really very encouraging, very inspiring, and as a result, we have been able to organize these kinds of functions. Thank you very much. Thank you, sirs.
Thank you, sir. Sir, please. With this, ladies and gentlemen, we end the proceeding for inaugural session. I would like to invite my colleague Mukti to take this conference session. Thank you.